Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to make a quick video on the latest segment of Tucker on Twitter, where he was interviewing the former chief of the Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, talking about what happened on that infamous day in January. And the reason that this is interesting and why I want to cover it is a little clip that we're going to play in a minute here, where he talks about Stephen Tuono from the Governor Whitmer Fednapping Hoax. If you guys remember, Dan Tuono was head of the FBI Detriot Field Office. At the time, certain things happened, during the entire Whitmer investigation that involved what I believe was the trial run, the dry run for the infamous day in January, which occurred in April in Lansing in 2020. So we're going to talk about all of this stuff and what he said, because he said that Dan Tuono broke protocol on that infamous day in January. And this is interesting to me because Republican politicians recently tried to lionize Dan Tuono because he said that the Mar-a-Lago raid was, a political, like, oh, really? He stated the obvious. And so they had the opportunity, by the way, when they had him in there to talk about the Mar-a-Lago raid, which he rightly called out as political, but everything he's done has been political his entire career at the FBI. So while they had him under oath, they didn't ask him about the infamous day in January. They didn't ask him about the Whitmer hoax. And so let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing I want to bring up is this picture here, because as I was detailing, Dan Tuono was in charge of the Detriot Field Office during the entire Whitmer investigation. He was then promoted by Christopher Wray 1 week after these men were arrested in October of 2020. They were arrested October 7th of 2020, or I'm sorry, October 8th, I believe. And then 1 week later, October 13th, Christopher Wray himself promotes Dan Tuono from head of the Detriot Field Office to be the assistant director of the Washington, D.C. Field Office. And then Dan Tuono is in charge of the D.C. Field Office during the events of the infamous day in January, and that involves similar elements to this event here. So what I want to talk about is this. There were a number of anti-lockdown rallies that occurred in Lansing, Michigan, during the summer of 2020 that some of the members of the Wolverine Watchmen attended, and some people who were not members, but the FBI later attempted to frame, recruit and entrap, but they were just there as on their own, right? Like Adam Fox was there this day, but I don't think he ever met these guys. I don't think he'd ever had any contact with them. But what happened this day is, and what they don't tell you, is that the FBI allowed this to happen. So this anti-lockdown rally had occurred. There was one on April 15th. I believe this is the one that was April 30th, where Dan Chappell, the FBI's main informant in the Whitmer hoax, was there. As you can see, you have two of the members of the Wolverine Watchmen, maybe three, present in this picture. This was inside the Capitol. But how this occurred was, these guys had attended this rally. Now, they'd attended numerous rallies, by the way, and were completely peaceful during this time. But you have the FBI, you have numerous agents kind of stationed around the area, and they're listening in real time because their informant, Dan Chappell, is wearing a recording device and he's talking to them in real time. And he says into his recording device, I think these guys are getting ready to do something. And so the handling agent there, I believe it might have been Impala or Jason Chambers, with the approval of, it had to have been Dan Tuono, who was, again, in charge of the Detriot Field Office overseeing this entire thing, he calls the Lansing Capitol Police and tells them that they're surveilling people and that they think something could happen. They want the Lansing Capitol Police to stand down, open the doors, and let everybody in. And so the headlines the next day which I believe very interesting that the media got these pictures and then they put these headlines out. And I think that they were doing what the FBI wanted them to do. I think the FBI wanted to get these pictures out because they were trying to use these fake militia groups that they had infiltrated or created themselves. And they wanted to recruit as many people of them as possible into these groups. And so I think that the reason that they had the Capitol Police stand down and let these people in is because they were going to run in the narrative with the in the media with the narrative that there were, you know, extremist far-right groups that like were storming Capitol buildings and stuff like that, and seeding that first narrative. And I think also they knew that pictures of these guys were going to go across the global media. They get global headlines. And then because of the attention that the Watchmen would get from this publicity stunt, this theatrical display that the FBI ran like a Hollywood production, they could use those media articles to try to recruit more people into their hoax. Because remember, and you'll learn about this in the documentary, my documentary on the Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot hoax, which is called, it's K&K Film, and I'll link it in the video description. I'll put a link to the trailer, to the official YouTube channel for that, and a way to donate to that if you'd like. But what you'll learn is that they wanted this to be a 15-state plot, basically, and so they were trying to recruit as many people as possible. But this is where this narrative first began. I think this was kind of the trial run for what eventually would happen in the infamous day in January. So this was, again, the trial run leading up to it. And as you can see, the guys were there peacefully. I mean, they did not actually storm any buildings. They stood in line and actually went through COVID screening. That's Paul Bellar. Paul Bellar may be in jail for 42 years because he, quote, provided material support, they claim, which is nonsensical. Yeah, I think this is the picture of them standing in line to go through COVID screening. But these are the images that made national news. And I think it was also done to kind of discredit what was a very large group of people that were, you know, I think coming together to voice their concerns about what they saw as unconstitutional lockdown mandates. So now let's go ahead and get into the actual clip.
None of the intelligence that was coming up talking about the storming of the Capitol.
Okay, so this is Stephen Sund, the former chief of the Capitol Police, talking to Tucker Carlson.
Killing members of Congress or killing my police officers was ever discussed in those the conference calls that I was on, at least. And think of this.
And so you never heard that?
Never heard it. And
but how could you not have? I mean, I don't work in a federal bureaucracy, but that doesn't seem to make sense at all.
It doesn't make sense. Think about this. On January 5th, the day before the attack, at 1 p.m., I think it's 1 or noon, I had a conference call with the leaders of all the law enforcement.
So what he's going to say here is key. I want you guys to listen to this, because what I think he's describing is it is almost as if he was witnessing a cover-up in an operation in real time. And it wasn't until looking back in hindsight that he's like, you know, how did this happen? That he starts kind of putting it together.
Conti from Metropolitan Police Department, Steve Tuono, the director of the Washington.
So here he mentions Dan Tuono. This is why we're bringing this up, because I have been calling this man out, and he needs to be held accountable. He needs to answer questions under oath about the Whitmer case, about the infamous day in January, about the pipe bomber, etc.
Field Office for the FBI. Nobody from DHS was on. I hadn't thought about that, but all the law enforcement that was down there. I had the military district of Washington.
Oh, regarding DHS, I have a FOIA request that I made about the infamous day to DHS's Intelligence and Analysis Department. I got 93 pages in response, and we will look at that because it is very interesting.
General Omar Jones on the phone with me. I had the head of the National Guard, General William Walker, on the call. It was a call I coordinated. Not one person on that call talked about any concerns for the intelligence, the attack on the Capitol, the threats to officers.
Isn't that interesting? If they knew that there was chatter happening, right, which they themselves have talked about, we know that they knew that, why wouldn't they tell him this the day before and give him a heads up? Weird, huh?
That we were seeing that was out there. That's what's scary.
But to be clear, do we now know for a fact that the people on that call knew about those threats and didn't mention them to you?
So this is what we know for a fact, and I'll tell you, I'm not the only chief that was in the dark. You look at Robert Conti, head of the largest police department in Washington, D.C. He also said the same thing. He wasn't getting the same notifications like the Norfolk memo that came out the day before. He didn't get it. So Steve Tuono, who's the Washington Field Office.
Pay attention. This is Dan Tuono, our guy from, the Whitmer hoax, who'd been promoted because of a job well done in that political hoax, gets brought in for another political hoax. Interesting, no?
FBI
director. You look at the GAO report that came out February of this year. It talks about multiple emails. Is a GAO report, or it's a Senate report that just came out in July, just last month. Talks about multiple emails going to Steve Tuono on Sunday, Monday, and some probably Tuesday, just the days before, talking about the violence that they're predicting coming up to the Capitol.
Why didn't he then relay this?
And I have a video call with him on that Tuesday, and nothing said about it. I mean,
he didn't mention it.
Not a word, not a word.
So, not to repeat myself, but that just does not make sense.
It does if it's a operation you've been planning for a while. Now, here we have just to remind people, about this. Remember, Dan Tuono was part of this. He came out, he made a statement, and he oversaw this. And this was the trial run for this. Just so we're perfectly clear. Now, moving on. Just to bring up, that's where this clip comes from. Tucker did a 55-minute interview. Now, I encourage everybody to go watch that. It's on Tucker's official Twitter. But here, Nova Campaigns, you should follow them. If you're not on Twitter, clipped out this part, Sund reveals Dan Tuono had intel, unexpected day of infamy issues leading up to rally. FBI shared nothing with Capitol Police. Keep in mind, FBI had dozens of CHSs embedded, 100%. And then Julie Kelly, our friend, who has also done great work covering this, you should be following her as well. She says, it makes sense when you realize Dan Tuono was head of the Detroit FBI office responsible for the Whitmer Fednapping hoax, which included the use of at least 12 informants, 3 undercover agents. In October of 2020, it was October 13th, Ray promoted him to be the assistant director of the DC field office. And then she continues and says, when I interviewed Sund last month, he told me that call was the first time he'd spoken with Dan Tuono, who on J6 was the conduit for all intelligence coming into the FBI that day, per witness testimony from the committee. But the committee never interviewed Dan Tuono. Why? This is why. Just so everybody is clear, I want to bring this up because it should be noted. This is an archived article from the New York Times. They called Michigan the dress rehearsal for J6. Now, they lie about it and they frame it as in the opposite direction. This was the FBI's dress rehearsal. We now know that. In fact, as I said, testimony from the federal and state court make very clear the FBI let this happen. They wanted it to happen. And the way that this article frames it, they do not mention the 12 informants. They don't mention the 3 undercover agents, etc., etc. They just make it look like, oh, this just happened. No, the setup, the frame job, the hoaxes are being revealed. Let's continue on, because this is very important when it comes to Dan Tuono's being held accountable for things that happened. This is a letter that was sent to Dan Tuono, also to Stuart Platt, the assistant director of the FBI, right before the Whitmer case, right? That investigation officially starts in March of 2020, although targets of that investigation, some of them had been under surveillance and were being investigated well before that. But let's just mention this letter sent by Brian P. Lennon. He is a former U.S. attorney for the Western District of Michigan. And he said to Stuart Platt and Dan Tuono, in February of 2020, this is when Dan Tuono was head of the Detriot Field Office. He is saying regarding Special Agent Henrik Impola, Detroit Field Division. He goes on to say in detail how Special Agent Impola committed perjury and engaged in essentially what amounts to gross misconduct in this case. And then he asks that the FBI investigate Impola for perjury and misconduct. And so what is interesting here is that, again, this is February of 2020. This is 1 month before Impola will be made a handling agent in the Whitmer case. So why then did the FBI not take these allegations seriously? Was there an investigation into Impola at all? And where is the report of the internal affairs investigation? So here it says that this letter's to inform you of the serious misconduct of the lead case agent, Impola, an FBI special agent at the Detriot Field Office. As explained in more detail below, Special Agent Impola committed perjury in early 2018 when he testified under oath on a material matter and in a manner that was inherently inconsistent with his sworn testimony and affidavit supporting applications for numerous federal warrants, at least 3 of which Impola had in hand when, on January 6, 2017, he solicited the assistance of Border Patrol in a conspiracy to violate this man's constitutional rights. Now, getting down to here, the end of this, you can see, I know it's sideways, but you can look here. This was sent to Impola. It was also sent to Dan Tuono, as you can see here, when he was still head of the Detriot Field Office, and it was sent to Stuart Platt, the assistant director of the FBI in Washington, D.C. They knew. I had done a thread about this. I said, did you know former U.S. Attorney Brian P. Lennon sent a 10-page plus letter to Stuart Platt, the assistant director of the FBI, and he copied Dan Tuono, head of the FBI Detroit Field Office at the time, urging them to investigate Special Agent Impola, who would be made a lead handling agent in the Fednapping case 1 month after this letter was sent. Unbelievable. This was February 11. Mr. Lennon warned Agent Impola was engaged in gross misconduct, committed perjury, and asked why he had not been investigated by the Office of Professional Responsibility. Platt and Dan Tuono knew Impola was dirty while he was working the Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot. Special Agent Impola was one of the 3 lead handling agents in the case. Mr. Lennon writes, the rule of law is meaningless if the perjury committed by Special Agent Impola is ignored because of his status as an FBI special agent. Isn't that right? Now, we can get into the FOIA request I put in with DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis. You can just see this is only some of the stuff that I received of their documents here, but this is basically their timeline of events. This is actually quite interesting, and I will put the link in here because I would like other researchers and journalists to start going through this, because some of these emails are very interesting. They do talk about the potential for violence to occur, and then they also have some of the emails that were going back and forth in real time as the events of the Day of Infamy in January was unfolding. And it's very clear that they don't actually seem interested in doing anything about it. You can see they're like, and this is a DHS issue. You know, this is no different than the stuff that happened during 2020 and our previous unrest. Like, they don't care to deal with it. You know, it's very interesting. And like I said, there's just like a lot of questions here. And there's also reports that were being sent in real time. This is, you know, January 6th at 6:46 a.m. very interesting. And so, yeah, I just find it, you know, you can see this is urgent priority. Some of the information here is redacted, but they're like, oh, we need everything today, blah, blah, blah. They're going to have a conference call. This is just ridiculous. And so this is DHS, again, Office of Intelligence and Analysis, Current and Emerging Threats Center. So it just, there's a lot of questions about things. I want to bring up this also. Yeah, former head of the FBI J6 pipe bomb investigation comes clean with stunning admission. I don't want any conspiracy theories, but yeah, you know. So, it's interesting. You know, he points out here that Tuono voluntarily submitted himself before Judiciary Committee and raised powerful objections to the Mar-a-Lago raid that served as the basis for the first sham indictment of Trump. He says, we reported the most remarkable part of the story is not the objections themselves, but Tuono's identity. You know, everyone knows about him. He oversaw the infamous entrapment operation of the Michigan Whitmer Fednapping Hoax and the J6 pipe bombs. Now, he says, Tuono discussed with the committee concerning questions about the pipe bomb investigation, blah, 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 blah. So they talked about how certain video, I guess, just went missing, or and call logs just were not working that day. It's like, and then he's like, oh, we don't want any conspiracy theories. The person who found it, yeah, there's no chain of custody. The person that found it worked for a company that was contracted with the FBI. Yeah, so here, so this is, yeah, what a coincidence that after a pipe bomb sat there for 17 hours, a random pedestrian happened to discover it, and this served as a diversionary purpose. People were thinking that, yeah, that was to draw away law enforcement response from the Capitol. Okay, so then, okay, anyways, I'll include the link to this. It's kind of convoluted. It goes into like a little bit more detail about this, but here, I just want to point out the stupidity of the Republicans lionizing him. Former top agent confirms Justice Department aggressive push to conduct surprise raid on Mar-a-Lago. Stop lionizing him and don't refer to him as like a top agent. He's a top clown. He is a top man engaged in corruption, you know? So anyways, I just wanted to educate people on Tuono, and after this appearance by former Chief Sund on Tucker, where he says that Tuono broke protocol basically and did not tell him about, he didn't give him the information he needed when he needed it, and we all know why. So I would suggest that the Weaponization Committee bring Mr. Tuono in, get him under oath, and ask him questions about the Fednapping case, ask him questions about the infamous day in January, and about everything else he was doing while in their employment. Because if those events are any indication, I would suggest it's nothing good. But I'm interested to hear what you guys think about this. Is this surprising to anybody? And do you think that anything is going to be done about it? Are we going to get an investigation into this? I mean, I don't think so, but I do think in a way it's good because it brings more light to the fact that what occurred that day was, in fact, as you can see, coordinated operation, and they wanted it to happen if they didn't make it happen. But anyways, that's all I have for now. Have a good day, guys.